There is playing marbles with God. The children in the church school had been learning the 10 Commandments, and now it was time to review the commandments and discover how well they'd mastered the material. Rather than call for rote memory repetition, the teacher decided to use case studies to ascertain her students' ability to apply the Decalogue. Boys and girls, she said, Junior and Sissy were brother and sister. One evening, Junior's parents came to him and said, "We're taking Sissy to town with us. Would you please do the dishes? And please don't watch any television until the dishes are done." Junior agreed, but when his parents and sister came home later that evening, they found him watching TV and the dishes weren't done. Now, children, which commandment does that story illustrate? A bright young scholar instantly waved his hand. "I know, teacher, I know. Honor thy father and thy mother." "Very good, Billy. Now here's another story. When Sissy and her parents were in town that evening, they passed by a store counter with delicious candy spread out on top. And Sissy sneaked out her hand and grabbed a piece of candy. Now, which commandment does that illustrate?" Another hand shot up and a youthful voice blurted out, "I know that one, teacher. Thou shalt not steal." "Very good, Marie. You children are doing well." Now came a more difficult case study. How do you illustrate to children the 10th commandment, "Thou shalt not covet"? But the teacher had his story ready. Junior and Sissy both collect stamps. And one day Sissy had her stamp album spread out on her bed. Junior passed by the room and stopped to examine her stamps and noticed a stamp that she had that he didn't have. "I want that stamp, Sissy," he exclaimed. "No, you can't have that one. It's the only one I've got," she replied. "But I want that stamp." And again, "No, you can't have it." Well, finally, boys and girls, Junior stomped out of the room. Soon he returned with their pet cat in his hands. With one hand, he held the cat, and with the other, he held the cat's tail. "Listen here, Sissy," he announced. "If you do not give me that stamp, I'm going to rip the tail off." The teacher had the youngsters' undivided attention. Now, children, which commandment does that illustrate? The children sat in silence, their minds scrambling to figure this one out. Suddenly, little Jimmy in the back row jumped to his feet, waving his hand. I know. Teacher, she nodded, and so he went on. "What God hath joined together, let no man pull asunder." Now there's a new commandment. I don't recall that one being among the 10, do you? But those ancient words, once upon a time spoken by Jesus about a marriage, have a lot to do with the truth about God and outrageous grace. A truth that once it's joined together must never be put asunder. We must never separate our understanding of this God, who is not someone to be afraid of, but someone to be a friend of, from the picture of outrageous grace that he has revealed in the Bible, an outrageous grace that comes shining through when you play marbles with God. Marbles with God seems a bit preposterous, perhaps, but let me explain. A Jewish physician friend of mine loaned me a book that he said I must read, written by a best-selling author, Rabbi Harold Kushner. Just its title supplies plenty of food for thought. When all you've ever wanted isn't enough. It was while reading that book that I became familiar with the research and writings of the great Swiss developmental psychologist Jean Piaget. I hurried to the library and found 20 or more of his books on the shelves. I checked out the one entitled The Moral Judgment of the Child. In this book, he describes how a child deals with right and wrong, what is permitted and what is forbidden. His conclusions are fascinating. Piaget found a disarming way to gather his data by walking the streets of Geneva and nearby Swiss towns, approaching children playing marbles, and then asking them 3 simple questions. How old are you? How do you play marbles? And how do you know that is the way to play? After hundreds of such interviews, Piaget arrived at a revealing conclusion. Children pass through stages in their journey through marble playing, and I began to wonder, could these stages teach us something about how we live our lives, particularly about how we live or perhaps play games with God? Stage one. Stage one is where young children see the rules of the game, and by extension, all the rules they are given as having been handed down by an unquestionable higher authority. As Kushner rephrased it, for example, here is a portion of an actual conversation with a 5-year-old Swiss boy named Paul. Can you guess who is this child's unquestionable higher authority? The interviewer begins. Long ago, when the people were beginning the town of Nechatil, where the boy lived, did the little children play marbles the way you showed me? Yes. Always that way? Yes. How did you get to know the rules? When I was quite little, my brother showed me, and my daddy showed my brother. And how did your daddy know? My daddy just knew. No one told him. Am I older than your daddy? No, you're young. My daddy had been born when we came to Nechatil. My daddy was born before me. Tell me some people who are older than your daddy. My granddad. Did he play marbles? Yes. Did he play before your daddy? Yes, but not with rules. Tell me who was born first, your daddy or your granddad? My daddy was born before my granddad. Where is God? In the sky. Is he older than your daddy? Not so old. Amazing, isn't it? And pretty obvious who in Val's life is the unquestionable higher authority who laid down the rules. Why, not even God and Grandpa are as old as Daddy. Let's call this one stage the rule stage. Piaget discovered, however, that children playing marbles don't remain in that first stage. As they grow older, they begin to question all those childhood rules, even as they question their childhood authority. Who says we have to do it this way? And so adolescents go through an irresponsible stage where they make up their own rules, resulting in the game of marbles becoming either too easy or too difficult. Let's call this the rebel stage, where rebelling against authority is the hallmark. But Piaget also discovered that these same youth can come to the place where they finally conclude that if they're going to make their own rules, they need to adopt fair and reasonable ones. Now Piaget says they are at the threshold of maturity. Rules are no longer embraced as simply handed down from on high. Rules are concerned with mutual respect. Rules have to do with relationships rather than authority. In this third stage, relationship transcends rule. It is the relationship stage. Well, what does playing marbles have to do with God? Perhaps much more than we thought at first. Could it be that Piaget's discovery about the stages children go through in their relationship to authority and rules is in fact a description of our pilgrimage through life, our quest for God, so that one of these three stages describes your way of relating to God and mine too. Piaget himself suggests that the children's attitude toward the game of marbles is in fact a paradigm of our adult attitudes toward authority and rules. After reading and musing over Piaget's conclusions for the first time, I leaned back in my chair and pondered whether the Bible confirmed these conclusions of moral psychology. Do the Holy Scriptures affirm these stages in human development? And while I pondered, I quite unexpectedly recalled an old story. And the more I pondered the story, the more I recognized Piaget's three stages in that story. You know the story. The one about the farmer's young boy who comes storming into the kitchen, the screen door slamming behind him. His young face glistens with the sweat of his afternoon chores. His eyes are angry. His voice is fed up. I've had it up to here, he fairly shouts at his father and mother, who are seated about the red gingham tablecloth in the kitchen. I'm tired of the sweat. I'm tired of the stink, tired of chickens, tired of cows. And I want out of here, Father. I'm sick and tired of this life. I've decided I'm going into investment banking and I'm moving to New York. He finally pauses to breathe. I'm going to find my fortune far away from this place. Most people have heard Christ's parable of the prodigal son over and over again. But for a moment, no matter how many times you've been there before, I'd like to invite you to go back to Jesus' story and see if we can identify Piaget's 3 stages there: the rule stage, the rebel stage, and the relationship stage. And while there, perhaps we shall learn a valuable lesson about our own lives. Remember the stage 1 person, the small child in Piaget's progression, the one who views the rules as having been handed down by an unquestionable higher authority. This is the person who relates to rules as the ultimate, the final word in how to reap the rewards of the system. If you're going to get the goods, you better obey the rules. That's how small children naturally think. But is it any different for adults? Is it possible that in some ways, I am still a stage 1 person, or that you are? Is there a vestige of this way of thinking in the way we relate to God? People in stage 1 see God as an authoritative, strict father who lays down the law, the ultimate rule giver. He is the rewarder of the obedient. He is the punisher of the disobedient. Everything with him is thou shalt or thou shalt not. God is the ultimate, unquestionable higher authority. If you want your share of the inheritance, stay in line with him. Fall out and you lose your piece of the pie. Does one of the characters in Jesus' story fit into stage 1? At first, you might think that it's the prodigal, but think again. I don't need to retell the whole story to you, but if you haven't heard it recently, you might want to review it in your Bible, Luke 15:11-32. But for a moment, let's skip right down to the end of the story and focus in on the words of the prodigal's older brother in verses 28-30. He comes back from the field, covered with the sweat and mud and stink of a hard day's work, and he hears laughter coming from the house. What in the world is going on? And so he calls one of the servants to him and learns that his long-lost kid brother has suddenly shown up again. Came home this afternoon, and now father's throwing a party to celebrate. And how does the older brother react? Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, listen, for all these years I have been working for you like a slave, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. Do you hear what the older brother is saying here? I can't figure you out, Father. Look at this. All these years I've been slaving for you. Those are Jesus' words, slaving for you. I've kept every single one of your rules. I've never disobeyed. I've never sinned grossly. I've denied myself pleasures, all because I figured that's what you demanded of me. Pleasures I would have enjoyed now and then, but oh no, not me. I slave for you. And what do I get? You throw a party for this jerk of a brother of mine who ran away from you in the first place, spent your fortune, and slept with every woman in town. And what do I get for living such a drab, joyless life of obedience? Nothing, not a thing. No fatted calf, no party, no nothing. Does the tirade of the elder brother sound at all familiar? Is it possible you or I have even rehearsed that speech a time or two in the past? Possible that there's a little corner of your heart, or maybe a very big corner, that relates to God, all on the basis of rules and regulations, just as the older brother did with his Father? Could we have grown up with a religion that has taught us to expect God's rewards and punishments solely on the basis of our devotion to his rules? Sound at all familiar? Have you been playing the part of the older brother? Could it be that you and I have been following God all these years out of a sense of sullen obligation, a fearful obedience that keeps thinking, if I don't obey him, he's going to cut me out of his will? I can't help but wonder if maybe some of us are desperately playing the part of the elder brother, all because we have a mistaken notion about who God is. Don't misunderstand me, please. I'm not saying I'm opposed to the rules and commandments of God. Of course not. A loving God, like any loving parent, obviously gives protective rules and commandments. But could it be that some Christians have followed God all these years out of a sense of sullen obligation, slaving away for God because they're convinced that's the only way they'll get his inheritance? But there's a catch-22 with this spirit of sullen submission. Oh, sure, a constant focus on rule-keeping may appear to satisfy the ultimate higher authority, but number one, you're never sure. And number two, slaving away for him brings a costly trade-off. No joy, no peace, no laughter, no freedom, no nothing, but more and more of this mechanical, sullen, secretly complaining spirit of I'll do this even if it kills me kind of living for God. And come on, let's be honest. Isn't that kind of sullen, joyless submission one step away from out-and-out rebellion? Sure it is, because the someday is coming when the elder brother or sister wakes up to the truth and explodes in bitter frustration and rebellion. And then he too will run away from the Father. Or maybe the elder sister will never be brave enough to run away on the outside, but she will nurse an angry heart that has run far away from the Father on the inside. How could there be any peace or joy in a life like that? No wonder you can find so many stern faces in the church today. Elder brothers who've never run away, but who have really run away from the grace and love and joy and peace of the Father's house. Elder sisters who hear the music and dancing coming from the Father's house but refuse to go. All they know how to do is slave away for God, all because they don't know the truth about the Father. Remember, though, that Piaget discovered that children typically move into a second stage of development about the time they reach adolescence. Tiring of authoritarian rules, they throw them all off and try playing the game without rules, or at least with their own set of rules and standards. Any stage 2 rebel in Jesus' parable? Of course. And he's the classic manifestation of stage 2, the younger brother, the one we call the prodigal son. Read how Jesus describes him in Luke 15:13. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled into a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living, or as the New International Version puts it, in wild living. What's the mindset of the stage 2 rebel, the prodigal son? It more often than not is a reaction, a bold, flagrant reaction to the stage 1 mentality of the elder brother. Often it goes like this. I've had it with the conservatives. I've had it with all their authority, their restraints, their rules. I don't need anybody else telling me how to live. Not my family, not my church, not my school, not my government, not anybody. Because look at me, I'm an adult now, a free-thinking, independent, grown-up human being. Once again, sound familiar? I've known many of these younger brothers and sisters who aren't necessarily younger chronologically speaking. Many of them are very bright, very perceptive, who look at Christianity, who look at the church, and all they see is a bunch of rules. Young and not so young people who perceive the church and God as too authoritarian, too concerned with obedience rather than love. Stage 2 younger brothers and sisters who've chosen to throw all of that off, to write the church off, or at least to live on its fringes, looking in now and then and pitying those poor folk who are so bound and burdened by their joyless rules and regulations. It would be funny if it were not so sad. For you see, the two brothers are very much alike, deep down inside. Oh, it's true, the stage 2 prodigals called the stage 1 elder brothers conservatives, and the stage 1 rules-focused elders called the stage 2 rebels liberals. But beyond the name-calling, both boys really want the same thing. They want to be free. Both boys see the father as an authoritarian rule giver. Because of his rules, one boy leaves home and gets lost. Because of his rules, the other son stays home and gets lost. Both of them are wrong, and both are lost because they have missed the real truth about the Father, a stage 3 truth about the Father neither of them has discovered. And that is the truth, the real truth, that when it is all said and done, the Father values relationships more than rules. Notice in the story that the father leaves his house looking for both boys. He hurries off the front porch when in the squint of the afternoon sun, he spots the distant but familiar gait of his runaway younger son stumbling back down the road toward home. Never forget that the father who races down the dusty lane with his arms outstretched to embrace and kiss the prodigal is the same father who, in the twilighted shadows of that same evening, hurries out the door to welcome his elder son. Same father, same wide-open embrace, same eager and loving heart. Why? Because the truth about the Father is the same truth it's always been throughout eternity. What matters most to God in the beginning and in the end is relationship. The Father doesn't hurry out of the house to restore the broken rules. His heart races toward his boys in order to restore a broken relationship, because the Father values relationship more than rules. You see, the truth keeps fitting. God isn't somebody to be afraid of. He's somebody to be a friend of. For that very reason, the Father values relationships more than rules. Of course, there are rules. Every relationship in life is protected by very necessary rules. Take the 10 Commandments. The first 4 commandments protect your relationship to God. The last 6 protect your relationship with your fellow man. But God's preoccupation isn't with the rules, it's with relationships. And so it should be with the children of God, wouldn't you say? After all, isn't that what the outstretched arms of Calvary are all about? The wide open embrace of the Father and the Son to every runaway rebel, to every rule-driven elder. Come home to the truth about me. I am not someone to be afraid of. I am someone to be a friend of, for I value relationships more than rules. Think of the freedom of the friendship in that wide open embrace. To fall in love with this God who will take your rebel heart back, no questions asked about your guilty, sullen past or your profligate, shameful waste, because all that matters is that you've come home to him. To fall in love with this God whose arms are outstretched to your sullen, rules-driven heart, with the quiet assurance that all he owns has always been yours all along. So you won't abandon your slaving and embrace his friendship and step into the welcome glow of his love and joy and peace and laughter and hope once more. Oh, the freedom of the friendship in that wide open embrace, which, if I may repeat myself, is precisely the mission of the Christian church today. It is this picture of the Father that a relationally starved world is longing to see and know. It is this portrait of the Father that is the passionate heart and soul of everything Jesus taught and everything the Bible stands for. This is the truth about himself God has literally been dying to share with this runaway planet. If only the world could see those wide open arms of his, don't you think they'd come home? Then why don't we tell them?
Amen.